The weight of impossible Sienna Hartwell pressed her fingers against the cold window of the downtown attorney's office, watching rain streak down the glass like tears she refused to shed. Her reflection stared back at her, hollow-eyed and exhausted, a ghost of the vibrant musician she'd been 6 months ago. The violin case at her feet felt heavier than usual, as if it, too, carried the burden of her mother's mounting medical bills and the collection notices that arrived daily like clockwork, reminders of her failure. The leather chair across from attorney Mitchell Grayson's desk seemed designed to swallow her whole. Papers covered every surface, legal documents with words that blurred together into meaningless shapes. Her mother's stage 4 diagnosis had transformed their comfortable middle-class life into a desperate scramble for survival. The experimental treatments not covered by insurance had decimated their savings. And now, Sienna faced an impossible reality: continue paying for care that might extend her mother's life by months, or accept defeat. "Miss Hartwell, I understand this is difficult," Mitchell said, his voice carrying decades of delivering bad news. "But we need to discuss bankruptcy proceedings. The hospital has begun collection efforts, and without intervention, they could seize your mother's home." Sienna's fingers twisted the simple silver bracelet her mother had given her for her 16th birthday. She'd already sold her grandmother's jewelry, her car, everything of value except her violin and this bracelet. Music had been her salvation through the darkest months, the one constant when everything else crumbled. Street performances and cafe gigs barely covered groceries, let alone medical bills that climbed into 6 figures. "There might be another option," Mitchell continued, pulling an envelope from his desk drawer. "I have a client seeking a particular arrangement. It's unconventional, but legitimate and potentially lucrative. An offer too strange to be real." The name on the envelope meant nothing to Sienna until Mitchell explained. Julian Westbrook, founder of Apex Technologies, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. His innovations in artificial intelligence had revolutionized multiple industries, and his face graced business magazines with the regularity of a celebrity. But what would someone like that want with a struggling musician barely keeping her head above water? Mr. Westbrook's grandmother established a trust with specific conditions, Mitchell explained, adjusting his reading glasses. To access his full inheritance before age 40, he must be married for a minimum of 1 year. His grandmother believes marriage builds character and responsibility. She passed away recently, and the trust activates on his 34th birthday in 3 weeks. Sienna's stomach twisted with understanding. "He wants to buy a wife. He's offering a business arrangement," Mitchell corrected gently. 1 year of marriage, living in his home, ending social functions as needed. In exchange, he'll pay off your mother's medical debts in full, cover all future treatments, and provide you with a substantial sum at the end of the contract period. Enough to restart your music career without financial worry. The numbers Mitchell quoted made Sienna's head spin. More money than she'd earned in a decade of performances. Her mother's bills paid, treatments continued, maybe even a chance at remission with access to better doctors. All she had to do was marry a stranger and pretend to be his wife for 12 months. "Why me?" Sienna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "He could choose anyone." Will smiled slightly. Mr. Westbrook was very specific. He wanted someone intelligent, independent, and with their own passions who wouldn't expect romantic involvement. Someone who needed the arrangement as much as he did. "Your situation came across my desk, and I thought you might be compatible candidates for a mutually beneficial agreement." The meeting that changed everything. 3 days later, Sienna stood in the lobby of Westbrook Tower, craning her neck to see the top of the glass and steel structure that seemed to pierce the clouds. Her best dress, a simple black sheath she'd worn to auditions, felt inadequate surrounded by marble floors and modern art worth more than her childhood home. Security directed her to the private elevator that opened directly into Julian Westbrook's penthouse office. The space took her breath away. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, while the office itself blended cutting-edge technology with warm, natural materials. Screens displayed streams of data and code, but wooden bookshelves lined one wall. Filled with leather-bound volumes that suggested depths beyond the tech genius persona, Julian Westbrook stood at the window, his back to her, talking on a phone in what sounded like fluent Mandarin. He was tall, over 6 feet, with broad shoulders under a perfectly tailored navy suit. His black hair was slightly too long, curling at his collar in a way that suggested he forgot to schedule haircuts. When he turned, Sienna's breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, with sharp features that cameras somehow failed to capture accurately. Dark blue eyes studied her with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously exposed and seen. A faint scar curved along his left jawline, an imperfection that somehow made him more real, less like the untouchable billionaire from magazine covers. "Miss Hartwell," he said, ending his call and crossing the room with measured steps. "Thank you for coming." I hope Mitchell explained the situation adequately. His voice was deeper than she'd anticipated, with a slight roughness that suggested late nights and too much coffee. Up close, Sienna could see the fine lines around his eyes, the shadows beneath them that spoke of exhaustion, carefully hidden beneath professional polish. This wasn't just a billionaire playing games. This was a man carrying his own burdens, facing his own impossible choices. "He explained you need a wife to access your inheritance," Sienna said, proud. Her voice didn't shake. "That you're willing to pay handsomely for the appearance of a marriage without the reality." Something flickered in Julian's eyes. Appreciation, perhaps, for her directness. "I value honesty, Miss Hartwell." "Yes, that's exactly what I need. My grandmother had old-fashioned ideas about responsibility and commitment. She believed marriage would force me to consider something beyond work and profit margins. And you disagree?" Julian's smile was brief and humorless. "I think marriage should be based on genuine connection, not financial convenience. But I also won't let her final wishes prevent me from accessing capital that could fund research, saving millions of lives. Sometimes compromise is necessary." Sienna understood compromise. She'd been compromising her dreams for months, playing popular covers in cafes instead of the classical pieces she loved, because covers paid better, trading her artistic vision for survival. What was one more compromise, especially one that could save her mother's life? "What exactly would you expect from me?" she asked. Julian gestured to the seating area near the windows. As they sat, Sienna noticed how he maintained careful distance, respecting her personal space in a way that suggested he understood the awkwardness of their situation. "You'd live here," he began, his voice taking on the measured tone of someone presenting a business proposal. "The penthouse has multiple guest suites, and you'd have complete privacy. We need to attend social functions together, perhaps a dozen events over the year, family gatherings for major holidays." The appearance of a believable marriage without requiring actual intimacy. The word intimacy hung in the air between them, loaded with implications neither seemed ready to address. Sienna felt heat creep up her neck, but forced herself to maintain eye contact. "And after the year?" she asked. "Quiet divorce, citing incompatibility. You'd receive the agreed-upon sum, and we'd go our separate ways. No scandal, no drama, just two people who realized they weren't compatible for the long term." It sounded clinical, businesslike, and utterly devoid of the romance Sienna had once imagined for her life. But romance was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her mother's next treatment was scheduled in 2 weeks, and the hospital had made clear they wouldn't proceed without payment guarantees. "I need to think about this," Sienna said, though her mind was already calculating timelines and possibilities. Julian nodded, standing and offering his hand to help her up. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, awareness of his warmth and strength. His hand engulfed hers completely, calloused in a way that surprised her. She'd expected soft, pampered hands, not the roughness suggesting he worked with them. Built things with his own 2 hands, despite his wealth. "Take whatever time you need," Julian said, though his eyes suggested time was something neither of them had in abundance. "Mitchell has my contact information. When you decide, we'll proceed with the legal arrangements." As Sienna rode the elevator down, watching the floors tick by with dizzying speed, she realized she'd already made her decision. Pride was a luxury. Dignity was expensive. But her mother's life was priceless, and if selling a year of her own life to a stranger could save it, then perhaps some bargains were worth making. She pulled out her phone and dialed Mitchell's number before she could second-guess herself. "Tell Mr. Westbrook I accept his offer." New realities and unexpected discoveryisming into Julian Westbrook's penthouse felt like stepping into another dimension where everything was too clean, too perfect, too expensive to touch. Sienna's entire apartment could have fit inside the master suite's walk-in closet, and she found herself terrified of breaking something worth more than her annual income. Helena, Julian's housekeeper and the only staff member who lived on premises, helped her settle into the guest suite with patient kindness. "Mr. Westbrook isn't as intimidating as he seems," Helena offered, unpacking Sienna's modest wardrobe into a closet designed for someone with 10 times more clothes. "He works too much and forgets to eat, but he's got a good heart buried under all that seriousness." The suite itself was beautiful in a minimalist way. All clean lines and neutral colors with touches of warmth in the textiles and artwork. A stunning view of the city stretched beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. And Sienna spent her first night watching lights twinkle like earthbound stars, feeling utterly displaced from her real life. The marriage ceremony happened with efficient speed at City Hall. Sienna wore a simple cream dress Helena had insisted on purchasing, while Julian appeared in a dark suit that probably cost more than Sienna's violin. The vows felt hollow, words spoken to a judge who'd performed hundreds of similar ceremonies. Probably none quite as coldly transactional as theirs. "I do," Julian said, his voice steady and businesslike. "I do," Sienna echoed, sliding the platinum band onto his finger with trembling hands. When the judge pronounced them married, and Julian pressed a brief, perfunctory kiss to her cheek, Sienna felt nothing except relief that the first hurdle was cleared. Her mother's treatment could proceed. That was all that mattered. The first weeks established a careful routine. Julian left for work before dawn and returned late, often eating dinner in his home office while video conferencing with international teams. Sienna spent mornings visiting her mother, whose color was already improving with better treatments, and afternoons practicing in the music room Julian had mentioned she could use. The music room was Sienna's sanctuary, a space clearly designed by someone who understood acoustics. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves held an impressive collection of classical recordings, and the Steinway grand piano in the corner was maintained in perfect condition. She'd been playing scales one afternoon when Julian appeared in the doorway, still wearing his suit jacket but with his tie loosened and top button undone. "I didn't know you played piano too," he said, hovering at the threshold as if unsure whether he was welcome in his own music room. Sienna's fingers stilled on the keys. "Just basics. Violin is my primary instrument, but piano helps with composition. Would you play something?" Julian asked, surprising her. "If you don't mind. I haven't heard live music in this room since I bought the place." Something in his request felt vulnerable, a crack in the professional facade he maintained. Sienna nodded, choosing a Chopin nocturne her mother had loved. Her fingers moved across the keys with practiced grace, pouring emotion into the melancholy melody. When she finished, silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sound of Julian clearing his throat. "That was beautiful," he said quietly. "Truly beautiful." Their eyes met across the room, and for the first time since they'd met, Sienna saw past the billionaire exterior to the man beneath. Loneliness shadowed his expression, a recognition of beauty he'd denied himself in pursuit of success and innovation. Breaking through the waltzed charity gala came in their second month of marriage, a glittering affair at the Museum of Modern Art benefiting music education programs. Helena had helped Sienna choose a midnight blue gown that hugged her curves before flowing to the floor, elegant without being ostentatious. Diamond earrings Julian had insisted on purchasing completed the ensemble. Though Sienna felt uncomfortable wearing jewelry worth more than her mother's house, Julian appeared in a classic tuxedo, looking every inch the powerful businessman. But his eyes widened when he saw Sienna. "You look stunning," he said, his voice carrying genuine admiration rather than polite compliment. "You clean up pretty well yourself," Sienna replied, allowing herself a small smile. At the gala, Julian kept a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her through crowds of donors and board members. Sienna found herself genuinely engaged in conversations about arts funding and education access, her passion for music overcoming her intimidation. Several people commented on what a lovely couple they made, and Julian's response grew warmer each time, his arm pulling her slightly closer. The evening's entertainment featured a string quartet, and Sienna watched with rapt attention, her entire being focused on the music. She didn't notice Julian watching her instead of the performance, his expression softening as he observed her obvious joy. "You miss performing," he said during intermission, handing her a glass of champagne. "Every day," Sienna admitted, "but practical concerns take priority. Music doesn't pay medical bills." Julian was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if considering something. What if it could? What if you could have both? Before Sienna could ask what he meant, the quartet's leader approached, recognizing Sienna from her conservatory days. They spoke enthusiastically about technique and repertoire, and the conversation ended with an invitation to perform at the museum's next fundraiser. "I couldn't possibly," Sienna began, but Julian's hand tightened at her waist. "She'd be honored," he said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "What date did you have in mind?" Walking back to the car, Sienna rounded on him. "Why did you do that? Gave up performing. I don't have time to prepare, and I certainly don't have the right connections for that kind of venue." Julian stopped on the sidewalk, turning to face her fully. In the streetlight's glow, his features were softer, more open than she'd ever seen them. "Because watching you light up during that performance reminded me why I built my company in the first place. To solve problems and help people pursue what matters to them. Your music matters, Sienna. It shouldn't have to be sacrificed." The use of her first name, which he'd largely avoided during their businesslike cohabitation, sent warmth through her chest. But the arrangement was supposed to be simple. "This is getting complicated." "Maybe complicated isn't such a bad thing," Julian said softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of honey blonde hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Sienna found herself leaning into the touch despite every rational instinct. "Julian, we can't blur these lines," she whispered, though her body disagreed as she swayed closer to him. "Then tell me to stop," he replied, his other hand coming to rest on her waist. "Tell me you don't feel this thing building between us, and I'll go back to being the distant businessman who barely speaks to you at breakfast." But Sienna couldn't tell him that, because it would be a lie. Somewhere between the awkward ceremony and this moment, she'd started seeing Julian as more than a means to an end. His quiet thoughtfulness, the way he remembered. She took her coffee with honey instead of sugar. How he'd started timing his morning runs to coincide with hers, so they could talk about inconsequential things while the city woke around them. "I feel it," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the city sounds. "But I don't know if we should." Julian's smile was gentle, understanding. "Neither do I, but for someone who's built a career on calculated risks and data-driven decisions, this feels like something worth exploring." He leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to step away, to remind him of the boundaries they'd established. Instead, Sienna rose on her toes, meeting him halfway. The kiss was soft and questioning, a tentative exploration rather than passionate claim. But it sent electricity through her entire body, awakening something she'd thought buried under stress and survival. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder. Julian rested his forehead against hers, his hands framing her face with surprising tenderness. "We should probably talk about this." "Probably," Sienna agreed, though she made no move to step away from his embrace. "But maybe not tonight." "Then what about tonight?" Julian asked, his thumb tracing her lower lip in a gesture that made her knees weak. "Tonight, take me home and kiss me again," Sienna whispered, surprised by her own boldness. "We can figure out the complications tomorrow." Julian's answering smile was the most genuine she'd ever seen from him, transforming his serious features into something breathtakingly handsome. "I can definitely do that." Falling without permission weeks following their first kiss transformed their arrangement into something neither had anticipated. Julian started coming home earlier, often bringing takeout from restaurants Sienna had mentioned wanting to try. They'd eat together in the kitchen, Helena having tactfully made herself scarce, talking about everything and nothing. Julian spoke about his work with a passion Sienna found captivating, his eyes lighting up when describing innovations that could change lives. In turn, Sienna shared her musical journey, the hours of practice that had defined her childhood, her dreams of performing in concert halls. Julian listened with complete attention, asking intelligent questions that proved he wasn't just being polite. He genuinely wanted to understand her world, her passions, the things that made her who she was. Beyond their contract, they'd started spending evenings in the music room. Sienna would practice while Julian worked on his laptop, the sound of her violin providing a soundtrack to his coding. Sometimes he'd pause to watch her, his gaze intense and appreciative, and Sienna would lose her place in the music, distracted by the heat in his eyes. One evening, Julian set aside his computer entirely. "Teach me something," he requested. "About violin? You want to learn to play?" Julian shook his head, standing to cross the room. "Teach me to hear what you hear. When you play, you're somewhere else entirely. I want to understand where you go." The intimacy of the request stole Sienna's breath. She'd never tried to explain her relationship with music to someone who didn't already understand it. But Julian's earnest expression, his willingness to enter her world without judgment, made her want to try. "Close your eyes," she instructed, lifting her violin. "Don't listen with your ears. Listen with your whole body. Feel the vibrations, the way sound moves through space." She began playing Beethoven's Spring Sonata, pouring her heart into every note. When she finished, Julian's eyes were still closed, his expression peaceful in a way she'd never seen. Slowly, he opened his eyes, and the emotion there made her heart race. "I felt it," he said quietly. "The way the music built and released. Like breathing. Like heartbeat." "That's it exactly," Sienna breathed, lowering her violin. "That's what I've been trying to explain to people my entire life, and you understood in minutes." Julian closed the distance between them, taking the violin gently from her hands and setting it aside. "Maybe I understand, because I see the same thing when you play that I feel when I'm building something new. That complete absorption where nothing else exists except creation." His hands came to rest on her waist, pulling her closer. "Sienna, this wasn't supposed to happen. You were supposed to be a convenient solution, and I was supposed to be your financial security. But somewhere along the way, you became the person I most want to talk to share things with, to come home to." When reality comes knocking, morning started like any other in their evolving relationship. Sienna woke in her own bed, though increasingly she'd been falling asleep on Julian's couch after late-night conversations. Coffee waited in the kitchen, prepared by Helena, and Julian sat at the island reading news on his tablet. But instead of his usual distracted greeting, his face was serious, troubled in a way that set alarm bells ringing. "We need to talk," he said, gesturing to the seat beside him. Sienna's stomach dropped. Those 4 words had never preceded good news in the history of human conversation. She poured her coffee with hands that wanted to shake, willing herself to stay calm. They'd known this was temporary. They'd agreed on the terms. Whatever was coming, she could handle it. "My cousin Damien has raised concerns about our marriage," Julian began, his voice tight with controlled anger. "He's been investigating, talking to people, trying to find evidence that our relationship isn't legitimate." "Why would he do that?" Julian's laugh was bitter. "Money, of course. If my marriage is proven fraudulent, I don't get my inheritance. It defaults to Damien instead. He's always resented my success, convinced I don't deserve what I've built." Fear clutched at Sienna's throat. "What did he find?" "We've been careful. We attend events together, live in the same space. He found your mother's medical bills and the timing of their payment," Julian admitted. "He's preparing to challenge the marriage as a financial transaction rather than legitimate relationship. The trust's lawyers are requesting interviews, documentation, proof that we're actually married in more than just legal terms." The implications crashed over Sienna like a wave. Their carefully maintained boundaries, the separate rooms, the lack of physical intimacy beyond those stolen kisses. All the evidence pointed to exactly what their marriage was. A contract. "What happens if they prove it?" Sienna asked, though she already knew the answer. The marriage is annulled. The payments reverse. You'd have to return everything. Julian's voice broke slightly. Your mother's treatments would stop. No, that couldn't happen. Her mother was responding so well to the new protocols. Color had returned to her cheeks. She'd started talking about the future again, making plans for when she was in remission. Sienna couldn't take that hope away from her. There has to be something we can do, Sienna said desperately. Some way to prove the marriage is real. Julian was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he'd been considering this option and hating it. We'd have to make it real. Really? Real. Share a bedroom, demonstrate physical intimacy, convince everyone, including the lawyers, that we fell in love. Could we do that? Sienna asked. Convincingly? Julian turned to face her fully, his dark blue eyes searching hers with an intensity that made breathing difficult. Here's what I know, Sienna. Over the past months, this stopped being an arrangement for me. Somewhere between your terrible jokes at breakfast and the way you lose yourself in music, I fell in love with my contract wife. So, yes, I could be convincing. The question is, could you? The confession hung in the air between them, profound and terrifying. Sienna's heart hammered against her ribs as she processed what he'd said. Julian loved her, not just going along with pretense, but genuinely, actually loved her. Julian, she began, then stopped, unsure how to articulate the tangle of emotions in her chest. You don't have to say anything, Julian said quickly, standing as if to put distance between them. I know this wasn't part of our deal. I know you agreed to convenience, not complications. But if we're going to convince these lawyers, we need to discuss logistics. I can move your things into the master suite today. We'll need to coordinate stories, establish a narrative about how we fell in love. Stop, Sienna interrupted, standing to block his retreat. Just stop for a second and let me process. She took a deep breath, organizing thoughts that felt scattered and urgent. The truth was, she'd been halfway in love with Julian for weeks now. The way he listened when she talked, really listened like her words mattered. How he'd rearranged his schedule to drive her to her mother's treatments, sitting in waiting rooms working on his laptop so she wouldn't be alone. The gentle way he'd started touching her, casual brushes of hands and brief kisses that felt like promises of more. I'm scared, Sienna admitted, her voice trembling. Not of pretending for the lawyers. I'm scared because it wouldn't be pretending. I'm scared because somewhere in this mess of contracts and convenience, I fell in love with you too. The decision to stop pretending. Julian's expression transformed. Hope and relief and joy flooding his features. In 2 strides, he'd closed the distance between them, his hands cupping her face with exquisite gentleness. Say that again. I love you, Sienna whispered, the words feeling both terrifying and liberating. I don't know when it happened. Maybe that first night, you listened to me play and actually understood. Maybe when you remembered I hate roses but love orchids. Maybe it was gradual, like water wearing down stone. But it's real, Julian. It's so real it terrifies me. Julian's thumb traced her cheekbone, his touch, reverent. We can figure this out together. The investigation, the lawyers, all of it. But first, I need to know, do you want this? Not because of the money or the threats or anything external. Do you want a real chance at something that might last beyond the contract? Sienna didn't hesitate. She rose on her toes and kissed him with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. Julian responded immediately, his arms coming around her waist to lift her against him. The kiss was nothing like their previous tentative explorations. This was hungry, desperate, full of everything they'd been holding back. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Julian pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. Move into my room, not for the lawyers or the investigation, because I want to wake up next to you, because I want to fall asleep holding you, because this penthouse stopped feeling like a home until you were in it. Yes, Sienna breathed. Yes, to all of it. The investigation that had seemed so threatening that morning became almost secondary to the shift in their relationship. Helena moved Sienna's belongings into the master suite with knowing smiles and zero surprise. That night, Sienna slipped into Julian's bed wearing one of his shirts, her heart racing with anticipation and nerves. Julian emerged from the bathroom in sleep pants and nothing else. His chest, broader and more defined than suits had suggested. Tattoos she'd never seen before curved across his ribs, surprising her. There was so much about him she still didn't know, so many layers to explore. "I should tell you," Julian said, sliding into bed beside her, but maintaining careful distance. "I'm not expecting anything tonight. I just want to hold you." "What if I'm expecting something?" Sienna asked, surprised by her own boldness. Julian's eyes darkened with heat. "Then I'd be a fool to deny my wife anything she desires." He reached for her slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind. Instead, Sienna met him halfway, her hands exploring the planes of his chest, while his mouth claimed hers in a kiss that promised everything. Their coming together was tender and passionate by turns. Years of emotional denial burning away in the heat of finally acknowledged desire. Afterward, tangled in sheets, with Sienna's head on his chest, Julian's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "I didn't plan for this," he admitted softly. "I thought I could keep it simple, controlled." "You wrecked all my plans." Sienna smiled against his skin. "Good. You needed some wrecking. Your plans were too rigid anyway." "Is that your professional opinion?" Julian teased, his chest rumbling with laughter. "Absolutely. As your wife, I'm qualified to identify when you need more spontaneity in your life." The easy intimacy felt right, natural, as if they'd been together for years rather than months. When sleep finally claimed them, Sienna felt safer and more content than she'd been since before her mother's diagnosis, proving what's Reld lawyers' interviews were intensive and invasive, asking questions about personal habits, shared moments, intimate details that would be impossible to fabricate. But every answer came easily, because they were true. Yes, Julian knew Sienna took her coffee with honey because sugar gave her headaches. Yes, Sienna knew Julian had nightmares about his parents' car accident and needed someone to hold him when he woke gasping. Yes, they'd fallen in love, despite intending otherwise. Damien's challenge fell apart under scrutiny. The investigators found countless pieces of evidence supporting the legitimacy of their relationship. Text messages showing genuine affection, photographs where body language spoke of intimacy, testimony from Helena about their evolving dynamic. More importantly, when the lead investigator interviewed them together, what she saw was unmistakable. The way Julian's hand automatically found Sienna's. How their stories intertwined seamlessly because they'd actually lived them. The looks they exchanged that spoke of inside jokes and shared understanding. "Mr. Blackwood," the investigator said finally, closing her file, "I've conducted hundreds of these interviews. I can spot a performance. What you two have isn't performance. It's the real thing." The relief was palpable, but secondary to what they'd discovered about themselves. The investigation had forced them to examine their feelings, to confront what they'd been too scared to acknowledge. They'd passed the test, but more importantly, they'd chosen each other freely, completely, without reservation. 6 months after the investigation concluded, Sienna performed at Carnegie Hall as featured soloist with the Philharmonic. Julian sat in the front row, his eyes never leaving her throughout the performance. When she took her bows to thunderous applause, she looked directly at him, pouring all her love into that gaze. Backstage, he swept her into his arms, lifting her off her feet. "You were transcendent. I've never been prouder of anyone in my life. Thank you for believing I could do this," Sienna whispered against his neck. "For reminding me music matters. You reminded me that life is more than work and achievement," Julian replied, setting her down, but keeping her close. "You taught me that the best things can't be planned or controlled. They just happen when you're brave enough to let them." Their contract had expired months ago. The paperwork for their divorce sat unsigned in a drawer. Neither had mentioned it, both understanding that what they'd built together transcended legal documents and business arrangements. "We should probably make this official," Julian said one evening, pulling Sienna onto the terrace where fairy lights twinkled like captured stars. The real way this time. He dropped to one knee, producing a velvet box that held a stunning sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Sienna Hartwell Westbrook, will you marry me again? Not for money or convenience, or to satisfy lawyers. Marry me because I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone. Because you make every day better just by being in it. Because I want to spend the rest of my life proving that the best decisions are the ones we never see coming. Tears streamed down Sienna's face as she pulled him to his feet. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Though technically, we're already married, Julian grinned, sliding the ring onto her finger beside the simple platinum band. Then let's renew our vows. Properly this time, with your mother there, with friends, with all the romance we skipped the first time around. 3 months later, they stood in the same music room where they'd first begun falling in love, exchanging vows they'd written themselves. Sienna's mother, now in remission, cried happy tears. Helena beamed from her seat. Devin played violin as Sienna walked down the makeshift aisle. I promise to always listen when you play, Julian said, his voice thick with emotion. To support your dreams as fiercely as you've supported mine. To love you not just for convenience, but for always. I promise to wreck your overly organized plans, Sienna replied through happy tears. To remind you that some of life's best moments are unscheduled. To love you not because I have to, but because I choose to, every single day. When they kissed as husband and wife for the first time, it felt like a beginning rather than a continuation. Their contract marriage had expired, but their real marriage was just starting. And unlike contracts with predetermined endings, this one was written for forever.